So, welcome to another episode of We Are Food People. Myself and Barbara are here today with Peter Lemperis, who is the Global Director of Compensation Benefits and Mobility for Aramex. He's kindly collaborated with us to give advice from a HR perspective on the best way to ensure your application stands out when applying for a job. So, Peter, thank you so much for joining us. I'll hand over to you.
Absolutely. It's an honor to be here with yourself and Barbara to really kind of talk about, talent trends and how candidates can maximize their opportunity to secure the role that they're really interested in.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you for taking the time out. Really appreciate it. I guess one of the main questions, I don't know if you want to start, Barb's, or, if you want me to. How is the current situation affecting the job market at the minute and companies' manpower, sort of from internally your perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think, we're in this unprecedented situation globally. And, never before have economies been shut down to this level. You've got people working from home. You've got supply chains stopped. You've got people that are worried about their health and safety. And one of the first things that unfortunately gets cut is, kind of recruitment, both in the form of active recruitment today, as well as, employees that currently are in the business. And then if those employees don't end up losing their jobs, a lot of people are under pressure today from a salary and wage perspective and have taken salary cuts. So, the pressure in the market today is tremendous. Just in the US, you've got 25 million people that, filed for unemployment over the last 4 weeks. So it's really kind of creating a challenging situation for people, looking for opportunities, and they really need to, ensure that they have the right process in place, as well as, just having the right process in place in order to maximize their chance of, securing the job of their future.
That actually makes a lot of sense. And that being said, given that the industry right now is, freeze hiring or postponing their hires, there's going to be a time wherein everything is going to be open again and people will be hiring. So the first and one of the most asked questions that I usually get from the candidate is that if they have like 10, 15 years of experience, how do they fit that in a 2-page CV or resume? It has been advised for many, many years that a CV should only just be 1 page or 2 pages maximum. But if you do have a 10-year worth of experience and you have really good achievements, you kind of compromise that a bit by making sure everything fits in a 1 or 2 page CV. So how long should a CV actually be based on your experience?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think really 98% of professionals should be able to follow the 1 to 2 page rule. And I believe that when you're applying for a role, it's not relevant to put every single thing that you've ever done, because truthfully, a recruiter is not going to read it. So the focus on 1 to 2 pages is really kind of taking the requirements of the role in the form of a job description or a post and tailoring your CV to fit those points in the shortest amount of time. So, you may have an experience, 10 years ago that may or may not be relevant for the role that you're applying for today. And you don't need to pay as much lip service to that in the form of your CV. So really kind of creating a customized CV for that specific role, you should be able to, highlight the relevant experience as it relates to the role that you're applying for. Typically, I have a CV that I'll send out for an application will be 2 pages, but I have a CV that is actually 5 pages that has various bullet points depending on the role that I'm applying for. So the requirements for an HR director is different from a consultant, from a total rewards director. And so, I have, different bullet points as it relates to the role that I would be specifically applying for. And I would encourage candidates to have a similar approach.
Yeah, it's just having that tailored CV and ensuring that it screams suitability and relevancy. Would you include a picture or not? There seems to be a trend that, it was popular to do so and now not so much. What would your advice be?
Yeah, I've always really been no go on pictures. The exception to that would be if you are working in, maybe the hospitality industry and, have a front facing role, a people facing role. But I think, it really depends on the area of the world that, you're applying for the role. So I think, something like a photo on a CV might be more relevant for the GCC, but might be less relevant for, the West, for example.
Yeah, no, it makes sense.
But I don't have one on mind.
That was going to be my next question.
I was about to ask that. And I think it actually makes sense if you're applying for a technical position or a developer or a programmer position wherein, no one is going to see your face, but you will be judged by the code that you put in, or, the technicality that you have. There's no point in putting the picture in there. Because it can go both ways. It can be a positive thing or a negative thing. So let's make it neutral. If they require it, they will ask for it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. At the end of the day, I think, the way someone looks, is not, an indicative quality of how they would perform. If I'm hiring a candidate, I wouldn't even consider that. But, that's one perspective.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for answering. And I guess in terms of HR's perspective, how would you recommend that the applicants get the attention? They stand out amongst the crowd, the hundreds of other applicants that have applied.
Yeah, no, so it's a great question. And there's a few kind of tips that I can share on that. But it really kind of starts with figuring out the roles that you are really interested in. And taking a kind of a differentiated approach. So number one, having a customized CV for that particular role that obviously meets the requirements of that, particular job description, number one. But number two, potentially writing a cover letter and submitting that in the form of the online application. But the issue is that you're one of potentially thousands, maybe even millions of candidates that are applying. So I think that the candidates that are going to be successful today are really going to have to try to differentiate themselves. So one way that a candidate might differentiate themselves for a role that they're particularly interested in is sending a CV or cover letter to the hiring manager, which is often, you see that on LinkedIn or the CHRO or the talent acquisition director, is sending them an RMX package with their cover letter and CV. People love opening those packages.
Yeah.
It's one kind of easy way to really help ensure that your CV at least gets viewed. Might not mean that you're going to get the job, but it means that you're probably going to get noticed as a way of, to try to differentiate yourselves. But then today you also have a lot of these new portals that you would upload your CV to, and it uses kind of AI to really kind of pick out keywords from your CV, which should generally try to match the words that are used in the job description. But also what people are doing today is they're trying to trick the algorithm, and they're copying and pasting the job description, size 1 font, white font, in the header. And what it does is it tricks the algorithm, tricks AI into thinking you're a perfect match for that particular role. So I think, the combination of those two things, I think, can be a tremendous advantage to a candidate. But also, I think just, going out there and networking and really, if you see a role at an organization, figuring out who your second and third connections are to someone at that organization. Who can you get to introduce your profile or, candidacy to someone within the organization? And, these small things, I think, ultimately will help to make a big difference in ensuring your success.
Yeah, no, that's really useful and quite a genius idea. It's, gone are the days when we post mail now. So to have that, it's definitely a huge point of difference. No, thank you. Bob, so have you got another question that you want to ask?
Yeah, so once, for example, I submitted my application and I posted the RMX, and I sent out the physical CV. When do you think is the right time to follow up your application? Do I follow up the moment I send it? Do I follow up after a week, 2 weeks, or do I ever follow up? So what would be your point of view on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on where you are in the application stage. Nothing is more annoying than, receiving a follow-up for someone who's just applied. But if someone is in the process and someone from the organization has at least made some sort of contact, I think it's totally fair game to follow up with them every kind of 10 to 17 days, just asking for an update on the process, what are the next steps, understanding if there's additional information. But it's at the end of the day, it's a delicate balance. Following an interview, you should be sending a thank you letter, because it's one of the ways of initiating contact with them without necessarily asking for something in return. And it kind of helps to keep the dialogue going. But in terms of, sending a follow-up, you can then follow up from there, in, kind of that 10 to 17 day range.
Yeah, makes sense. And I guess once the successful applicant has secured an interview, have you got any tips to impress the interviewee? What would, as a HR, your perspective, what would stand out for you?
I think the first thing is just prepare. You can never be over prepared for an interview. And I think, there's fundamental questions that are really common in almost every interview. And being prepared to answer those questions by practicing with a friend. It could be a spouse, it could be a former colleague, it could just be a friend. Some of those questions are, tell me about yourself. Why are you interested in this role? Tell me about some of your biggest strengths. What really excites you about working at X company? Why are you leaving your organization? You can almost expect, these questions in some various form at any interview you go to. So really kind of practicing those, number one. But number two, going online, reading about the organization. So, the first thing I'll do is I'll go online, I'll look at the website, see what information is obviously available, but also looking at who they compete with, reading information about their competitors, because what that does is it gives you additional information about the industry that might be relevant to your understanding of a topic in a particular interview. But then also going on sites like Glassdoor and figuring out what other employees are saying, about the business, right? Because at the end of the day, you want to ensure that it's a good match for both the employer, but also the employee. So really kind of just preparing as much as possible, trying to, understand why you're interested in that role, and then coming prepared with questions that you may have about the organization. Nothing is worse than at the end of the interview when you ask a candidate, do you have any questions for me? And they just stare at you with right? You want people that come prepared. And it could be something, simple question, how does one move up here? What is the organizational culture like? What are your favorite parts about working here? Why have you stayed at X company, right? But coming prepared with something allows you to, really kind of carry yourself beyond, the questions that are asked of you.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, and it's great to sort of learn from your perspective as well, what you look out for, and what could set somebody apart against the crowd. So no, thank you.
And it's absolutely makes sense that preparation is the key. Some candidates haven't been in the job market for like 5-10 years, and they haven't thought about some of these questions, like why you're looking for a job, what are your key strengths, and all these questions seem simple, but if you're put on the spot, if you're nervous, if you're interviewing to change your life, then it can, it can actually be very difficult to answer on the spot. So preparation is the key. I guess once everything goes well, how do you then negotiate the salary? Like, I think this is one of the most difficult things that most candidate encounters. They don't want to over negotiate or undersell themselves. So how do you find that balance?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think, the issue is that when most people think about compensation, they primarily think about one number. And that number is, what do I get paid at the end of the month? And then what they'll typically do is they'll say, okay, in order to move, I would potentially need this, right? 10%, 15%, 20%. And I think the best way to really think about compensation is thinking about the total compensation package, right? So you'd be surprised at the number of organizations that might increase someone's fixed compensation, but then compensate for that in the form of a reduced incentive or no incentive, poor health insurance. So really, as an applicant, I want to understand what that total compensation package looks like, right? So what does that look like from a fixed perspective, which is your base salary and allowances you receive? What does it look like from an incentive perspective? So, incentive pay is important to people in terms of driving the right behaviors. How will my role be evaluated and how will I be rewarded? What does that look like from a total earnings perspective? Beyond that, what additional benefits am I provided from an insurance perspective, a life insurance, from a schooling perspective? How is the value of my annual tickets being calculated? What is the number of days that I'm receiving of annual leave? Is it calendar days or working days? And really kind of thinking about that total equation is one way to think about it. But also, I think the candidates that are most successful in terms of negotiating salaries will come in prepared and say, based on a lot of the research I've done, and you can find information on Glassdoor, you can also find information using some of the salary surveys that a number of recruitment firms put out, and really kind of coming prepared with and being able to push back and discuss in terms of what your expectations are based on what you think the market pays and the value that you're going to bring to that particular organization.
Yeah, no, interesting.
And it's all about preparation as well and full understanding of a bigger picture, short term, long term goal. It all comes together when it comes to negotiation. And I guess you're right. If you have that confidence, if you know that you're the right person for the job, if you understand the market, you know how much the competitor is paying or how much the value of this role is in the market, you will be in the best position to realign yourself when it comes to negotiation.
Absolutely. And I think, one of the most important questions for people to ask is when an offer is made, where does my compensation fall within the compensation range? Am I at the min, the mid, or the max? Now, some organizations might not tell you, but what that tells a kind of talent acquisition director is, this person knows what they're talking about. And a lot of organizations are shifting towards the idea of pay transparency, being transparent about pay, how people are recognized and rewarded. And if they're not willing to maybe share the specific information or tell you where you sit in that particular range, you should proceed with caution.
Yeah, kind of like a little bit of a red flag.
Right. Yeah, I mean, how does the compensation that I am receiving compare to my peers in similar roles within the organization?
Yeah. No, some really good points and some food for thought there for sure. We really appreciate you taking the time out and answering our questions, and hopefully it will help. I'm sure it will. Many candidates out there. So thank you, Peter.
Absolutely. It was great to speak with you both, and I hope that the candidates find this helpful.
For sure they will. Before we let you go, I just have one last question.
Okay.
Once you landed the job, just going back to the entire circle, so we know how to stand out, we know how to prepare for the interview, to negotiate on the salary. But once you landed the job, how do you make the first good impression from day one?
Yeah. So I think the common mistake people make is once they receive an offer, all of their work is done. when in reality, once they receive the offer, that's when actually like the real work actually begins, because it goes down to how do you build your name within the organization, number one, and number two, how do you demonstrate that you can add value as quickly as possible. So, the biggest advice that I can give people day one is meet as many people as you can. Your first 30 days should not be eating at your desk. It should be reaching out to people within the organization, old, young, different functions, to really kind of get to know them, understand the challenges that they face within the organization, what excites them, really kind of learning about the business, and kind of taking that feedback and incorporating that into your kind of 30, 60, 90-day plan, right? People that are most successful are able to make an impact and build a name for themselves in those 90 days. So, really kind of understanding the business, how the business makes money, what are some of the pain points, and where you can make the biggest difference in the shortest amount of time. The people that are most successful will have a plan to do that.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Amazing. Yeah, I guess that's one of the things that people forget. Once they landed the job, once they started, I'll leave it to the company to do my induction. But there's a lot of work as well involved from your side, from an employee side, to make sure that the employment goes well.
Absolutely.
And it's just reassuring that consistency and that they've chosen the right person for the job.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Peter, thank you so much for your time and collaborating with us on advice. We really appreciate it, and you've given us some great tips. So hopefully it'll be of value to candidates out there in their job search.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I'm happy to share my personal contact information. If candidates have, individual questions, they can feel free to reach out to me either via email or on LinkedIn. Networking is so important, especially in this part of the world. And, I think, the world would be a better place if more people tried to help each other. And, it's something that, I want to try to do.
Definitely. Oh no, well, thank you so much, and thank you for your time.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Take care. Stay safe.